before anything, Dr. Fauci, how are you doing? I mean, I think you have one of the most hardest jobs in the world. A lot is resting on your shoulders every single day. I see you on my TV screen. How are you feeling?
I'm I'm feeling fine. It's a little bit of a surrealistic experience, to be honest with you. It's totally exhausting, but the importance of the mission that we all have, that I'm just a part of, where so many people behind the scenes who are working as hard as I am working. But I think it's the focus on the extraordinary importance and the historic nature of what we're dealing with that gives me, the energy to work for the past year, literally 24/7, because I'm even working in my sleep. I think my head is going on in my sleep.
You at the runs. I mean, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, but in general, I'm doing fine. I think rather than worry about how I'm doing, what I do is I just focus on the real challenges we have. We continue to be challenged, even though we're doing much better now than we have done in the past. We have vaccines, which are really a ray of hope in this very, very difficult situation that we've been through. But it certainly is stressful. But whenever I think about the stress on me, I think about the healthcare workers who are literally every day working, putting themselves on the line, as well as the extraordinary number of people who have suffered, and tragically, the more than 500,000 people who've died from this. So that, I mean, my exhaustion, my what I'm doing is just a small something compared to what other people have gone through.
Of course, and on that note, I want to start with one of the most obvious questions, right? Talking about the challenges that you just mentioned, we know that Latinos, as of right now, are more likely to be infected, more likely to be hospitalized, and more likely to die from COVID than white people and Black folks and that Asian folks. And I think the question that's in a lot of our minds, particularly within the Latino community, is why don't the most vulnerable get vaccinated first, right? I think that's what people are still trying to figure out.
Yeah, that's really a good question. One of the things that becomes very problematic is when you pick out a racial or ethnic minority and say these are the ones that should be, as opposed to something that essentially involves all people and you have equity of advancement. Let me give you an example.
Yeah.
If you were to say, in a situation where you have, first of all, I understand exactly, if I were in your shoes, I would absolutely be asking that question. So the first thing to do is to respect the reason why you're asking the question. But the reasons that the Hispanic group has twofold things going against them. One, they are often in the kinds of jobs that put them out into the community with essential services, which makes them more vulnerable to actually getting infected, number one. And number two, they have underlying conditions to a greater degree for a variety of reasons, because of the lack of access to health care, because of a variety of economic and other situations that make them have a higher incidence of the comorbidities that make them more likely to have a serious outcome from infection, including hospitalizations and deaths. So there are other people who also have underlying conditions, who are also out there in the community, who are not Hispanic or African American. And it's felt that if you pick out people by ethnic or racial groups, that would create a whole bunch of other problems. So rather than do that, say what we're going to do is we want to vaccinate people quickly as we possibly can who have these underlying conditions, because those are the ones of which the Hispanic population will fall right into that category, as will African Americans. So it's a touchy situation when you talk about doing something on the basis of race or ethnicity, because it will always have objections from so many other different groups that'll make it very problematic. My feeling would be you get over that by putting a very strong effort on getting as many people vaccinated as quickly and expeditiously as possible, including the Hispanics, including African Americans.
Of course. And to your point, as we're talking about vaccine rollout, I mentioned the previous question because if you take a step back, you understand that even though Latinos are almost 20% of the population, during the first months of the vaccine rollout, only 11% of the vaccines went to Latinos, while 60% of the vaccines went to white folks. And so my question is, why trust the states and local governments this time, right? Particularly some states that truly politicized the virus at the peak of this pandemic. Why trust them to distribute this vaccine in a just and equitable way this time?
Yeah, you're asking tough questions, Paula.
No. These are, and I mentioned this, it's on people's minds,
Right. Yes. You're asking tough questions, and they're appropriate questions. Because there are a lot of other complicated issues that make that lack of equity occur. And whether or not it's because you can't trust the states, or whether because there are a lot of other issues going on that are almost systemic in their nature. I'm not making excuses for it, because I'm the first to admit that there are issues. And because of that, what happens is that President Biden has been very serious about getting the populations who don't have the natural access or influence to get access. That's the reason why we're putting now up to 440 community vaccine centers in areas specifically that have a higher demographic representation among Hispanics. We are getting pharmacies that are going to get supplied in areas. We're going to get mobile units to go out into the less than accessible areas. And then, there's always the concern about, particularly in the Hispanic community, about people who are afraid that if they come forward, that all of a sudden they're going to wind up getting into trouble from the standpoint of immigration. And that is a problem. It's a point that I didn't fully realize until I started talking to people, so that it's a combination. It's complicated. It's a combination of accessibility isn't as good because of so many social conditions, and on some part, an unfortunate reluctance of even those to come forward because of the anticipation of recriminations against them, which is the reason why we have to say publicly, and understandably, Hispanics may not believe it, but it's true, that no one is going to be penalizing you regarding immigration if you come forth to get vaccinated. That has been guaranteed by Department of Homeland Security and others that that's not going to happen. So that's the reason why I take the time to come forth and speak to a community, even though I'm not a member of that community. And I understand they're skeptical that I'm not Hispanic, I'm not African American, but in some respects, I'm telling you that you really should realize that we are trying very hard to address these systemic issues that I know if I were a Hispanic individual, I would be as concerned as you are.
No, and you just touched, I think, on one of the biggest problems that we're up against, which is that level of mistrust and fear that is among us. And so, which again is due to, it can be because of immigration status, culture, religion. But if you were in a room right now with a Latino who is hesitant to get this vaccine, what would you tell them?
Well, I would try and find out what the reason for the hesitancy is. Now, if the hesitancy is that, this vaccine, you made it so quick, it was so fast, I'm not sure if it's safe. Are you just trying to experiment on us because we're a minority population? The answer is that's a reasonable question. You never act like someone is asking an unreasonable or stupid question. They're all reasonable questions. And the answer to that is that the speed where we did something in less than a year from the time the virus was discovered in January of 2020 to the time by December where you were getting it into the arms of individuals is the fastest ever in the history of vaccinology that we've ever got a vaccine into the arms of people. So you're saying, well, there must be something wrong here. Well, the reason it got so quick is that it is the reflection of the extraordinary advances in the scientific aspects of platform technology and vaccine, which started decades before. So there's research that's basic, preclinical, and clinical that took place before January. So just because the virus was first recognized in January, things didn't start in January. They were going on for a decade. So the speed put aside. The other thing is, how do you know it's really safe and effective? Is this the federal government, whom we don't trust anyway, trying to put something over on us? Or is it the pharmaceutical company trying to make a lot of money?
Right.
The answer is the proof of the safety and the efficacy was done by clinical trials involving tens of thousands of people, 30,000 people with the Moderna trial, 44,000 people with the Pfizer trial, and most recently, over 40,000 people with the J&J. And the decision, and by the way, there was quite good representation of Hispanics in those trials. The reason was we made sure myself and my colleagues, would meet regularly with the company that was doing the trial, making sure that they good representation of minority community. Once the trial is over, the decision of whether or not it's safe and effective is not made by the federal government behind closed doors or by the company. It's made by an independent data and safety monitoring board who is responsible to the people, not to the government. They then examine the data, and if they think it looks really good, they'll say, stop the trial and present the data to the FDA. The FDA looks at the data, the career scientists do, and then they bring in their own advisory committee who makes a strong recommendation one way or the other. And the FDA listens to that recommendation about whether it should be distributed to the general public. So I can tell my Hispanic friends when they say, tell me why we should feel comfortable. And the answer is that the process was both independent and transparent. And I received the vaccine. If I thought it wasn't safe or if it wasn't effective, I can assure you I wouldn't have taken it.
Of course. Thank you so much for walking through that. I think it's very important for a lot of people to hear that. But then there's the other side. No, some of these are genuine concerns, but then another thing that we've been bombarded with is the misinformation campaigns, right? Sometimes you can be in Florida, you turn on Spanish language radio, and suddenly in WhatsApp messages on cell phones, if you walk into some evangelical churches in the Central Valley, you do hear a lot of these conspiracy theories that are very genuinely infiltrating our community. Some of them, some of the most popular ones are that the COVID-19 vaccine is inserting a microchip. I've also heard that.
But I'm the one that's doing the microchip.
And it's you, sir, that's right. I've also heard that chlorine dioxide, that was very popular, that chlorine dioxide cures COVID. A lot of people that I've interviewed will also tell me to my face, mi vida está en las manos de Dios, my life, God will cure me. And so it's real, I see it. Can you take a second to debunk some of these conspiracy theories, some of these myths that are honestly very dangerously infiltrating us?
Yeah, they have no basis in reality, Paula. I mean, they just don't have any basis in reality. And I mean, you take them one by one. So a microchip with an injection, I don't quite get that. And that's almost so ludicrous as to be.
It is, but people believe it.
I know. And I think what we need to do is, and again, one of the reasons why I do, whenever I get asked by the Hispanic community, whatever that may be, whether that be Univision, Telemundo, yourself, anyone, I always say yes, always, all the time, to get out there and explain. But what we really do need is we need leaders in the community that people trust. to get out there and speak to them, to get good representatives, be they sports figures or entertainers or people who can get there and speak to people in the community. And that if you're a community member, you say, well, that person came from where I came. They speak my language. They look like me. They have the same accent that I have. So it's the kind of thing that adds confidence. You can understand when they see someone like myself, who's been in the federal government for a long time, who, despite my track record of honesty and integrity, people still, they want to hear it from their own community. So perhaps
what you're saying is we need a Latino Dr. Fauci.
You do.
No, but that, I mean, it is, you give us so much confidence and calmness. And so it is a real sort of gap, no? The aggressive pushback against these misinformation campaigns, in which I do know the administration is trying to fight against.
Yeah. You know, I would think that even, I mean, I actually understand what you're talking about, and it's very frustrating when you know the people who are getting that misinformation are normal, smart, hardworking people in the community, and yet they get bombarded with so much information that you get confused about who's really telling me the truth. And, you know, it's very difficult for me to say, trust me. You know, that sounds almost is like, but the fact is you do want, because like I have been doing this for now, I graduated from medical school 52 years ago. I've been doing public health for the last 40 years. I've been director of the Institute. I have been doing this with HIV/AIDS, with Ebola, with Zika. So I have been doing this very consistently. You know, that is the reason why I say, you know, I understand why you may be skeptical, but I'm doing it because I care about you, because that's my whole life, is caring about people in the arena of global health. And
I was going to say, in fact, you mentioned your track record. One of the many things I admire about you is during the 80s, obviously you were one of the main scientists that was working on AIDS research. And one of the things you did back then is you made sure to open up, right, the scientific community to be more inclusive of LGBTQ voices, of people with AIDS, of journalists, in order to make your research more comprehensive.
Right.
And so how did that experience dealing with the HIV epidemic sort of shaped your understanding of vulnerable communities? Like, how do you carry that experience with you every day?
Oh, it is the foundation of what I do, because what I realized back then, that it is essential, if you're dealing with a very difficult problem that is very seriously impacting a particular community, you've got to reach out to the community. You've got to gain their trust. You've got to be consistent, and you've got to make it very clear with everything that you do that you're interested in their welfare. And you don't get put back and withdraw when they ask difficult questions, or even when they attack you. Because one of the, I think the best things I've ever done in my professional career was at a time when mostly gay men, who were really the ones suffering the most in those early years of HIV/AIDS, they were not getting the attention of having something to say in the agenda of the research and in the regulatory rigidity, which for years did not allow an adequate response to a disease that were killing so many young men who had no intervention whatsoever. So they wanted to change the paradigm. The scientific community, myself included, and the regulators for decades did things a certain way. And it was only the gay community, mostly gay men, but the entire LGBTQ community became very, very confrontative and theatrical about gaining our attention. Many of the scientists pulled back. The one thing that I was able to do was to say, let me put myself in their shoes. And what would I have done if I was in their shoes? And I came to the conclusion, I would have done exactly what they did. All of the demonstrations, all of the closing down Wall Street, just closing down the Golden Gate Bridge, and all kinds of interference with civil society. Then I began to say, okay, let me hear what you have to say. Put aside the theatrics, put aside the accusations, and listen. And when you listen, you realize that everything they were saying makes sense. Not everything they say is correct, but the reason why they're doing it has a basis. So I've learned that, 4 decades ago, 3 decades ago, and I learned it well. And what I apply now is the same thing. I want to hear what the concern is in the Hispanic community, in the African American community. And I can't change systemic racism. I can't change systemic prejudices and economic deficiencies, but I can at least understand where you're coming from and try and convince you that right now, for your own good, for that of your family, and for that of your community, it's very important to abide by the public health measures, number one. And two, when a vaccine becomes available, to take the vaccine.
Thank you for that. I think that's so important. At least I'll speak for myself. I know that you see that, and that is something that we can't even take for granted. We know this won't be the last pandemic. What can we expect in the future, and how can we better prepare for it?
Well, there are two things. There are preparation and response. And it's very interesting, Paula, that right before the COVID-19 outbreak, we, the United States, were judged by Johns Hopkins School of Public Health as being the best prepared country in the world, likely because we had a lot of resources, we were doing a lot of things. Then along comes COVID-19, and we got hit worse than virtually anybody else when you look at death rates and things like that. I think we and the UK probably have done as bad or worse than anyone else. So preparation counts, but response is important too. What we need to do is we need to build up the public health infrastructure that we have in our country. But also, the one success story in all of this has been the science that developed the vaccine. So right now we have a highly efficacious vaccine, which will be the solution, the ultimate end game of all of this. But we've got to get as many people vaccinated as quickly and expeditiously as possible. But the one thing that's really a lesson learned that's hard is that, unfortunately for us, this outbreak has taken place at a time in our society when the divisiveness is palpable. In all of my years, even with some of the political issues back in the years of HIV/AIDS, never have I seen a degree and intensity of divisiveness in society, where public health issues become almost a political statement. Whether you wear a mask, whether you go indoors and dine, whether you do this, whether you do that, calling things a hoax, calling it fake news when people are getting sick and dying all around you. That makes it very difficult to get an adequate response. So the lesson learned is that if we're going to respond to this outbreak and to future outbreaks, we've got to realize that as a nation, we are all in this together. We've all got to be pulling together, because the virus doesn't know the difference between one ideology and the other. The virus will do what the virus is going to do. And the only way you're going to adequately counter it is by doing things in a consistent, uniform way, making the health of the individual and of the country the most important thing. Obviously, you have to pay attention to the economy, and you don't want to shut things down to the point where you're going to make even more problems by the economic downturn. But you've got to have some consistency in the public health response. And we didn't have that when we tried to reopen the country. Remember when we said there's the gateway, there's phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. we had different states doing things completely differently. Some didn't pay attention, some did, and the people didn't listen. Some did it halfway. You've got to be consistent. We have a common enemy, and the enemy is the virus, not each other. And we were kind of acting like the enemy were each other when it isn't. The enemy is the virus for now. Let's get that out of the way, and then we could worry about political ideologies.
I know I have one more minute with you, sir. I'll be very quick. Just two quick questions. Latinos, we love to hug. We survive on family. We survive on gatherings. What do you miss the most of a pre-COVID-19 world? I know, for example, you had to skip Thanksgiving with your daughters this year. What do you miss the most?
That's what I miss most. My being with my family. And doing just what you said, seeing my daughters. I know that the Hispanics have a lot of very good traditions with families. My tradition is I was born on Christmas Eve. And ever since they were born, every Christmas Eve, we'd have a big Italian dinner in our house together and hug and kiss and be very warm with each other. This was the first year since they were born. And I have 3 daughters who are between their late 20s and early 30s. The first year in their existence where we were not together as a family. So that's what I miss the most.
And lastly, sir, it's a time where we are all hopeful, but there are still some Latinos that are struggling, that can't quite see the light at the end of the tunnel. Just a final message of hope for those people.
Though there is light at the end of the tunnel. This will end. I will guarantee you it will end. We're not there yet. But we have the capabilities, both by our behavior and by our taking the vaccine, where gradually over months, we will get closer and closer to normality. And we, in fact, will get back to normal. It may not be as quickly as we'd like, but we will get there. I promise you.
Dr. Fauci, thank you truly so much. It's a complete honor. We are all so lucky to have your voice. And so really, really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Paula. It's a pleasure to have been with you. Bye-bye.
Bye.